Tensions remain high as efforts continue to reinforce the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. With U.S. envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in Israel, Washington is pushing to keep the truce on track and move towards the next phase of its peace plan. But as the U.S. seeks to solidify the truce, Israel's leader sends a clear, forceful message. Netanyahu vows to enforce the agreement in Gaza and Lebanon with an iron fist against any threat. Tonight we ask the key question: can diplomacy hold the line? And if so, what are the biggest challenges facing the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire? I'm Hani Saif and this is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Recently, U.S. Special Envoy and son-in-law of President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss the next stage of the Gaza ceasefire, as Washington intensified efforts to preserve the truce. According to Le Monde, their meeting in Israel centered on advancing Trump's broader peace plan, particularly the transition from the current phase, focused on prisoner exchanges and humanitarian relief, to the next stage, aimed at disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. Phase 2 of the plan would also involve the creation of an international stabilization force and long-term measures to prevent Hamas from regaining power. The newspaper reported that Kushner's visit marked a renewed push by Washington to ensure that the ceasefire holds and to lay the groundwork for a more durable peace. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the Knesset that Israel will enforce ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon with full strength, as long as they remain in effect. According to the Times of Israel, Netanyahu pointed to ongoing clashes in Lebanon, where Israeli strikes targeted Hezbollah almost daily. Netanyahu said combined military and diplomatic pressure, particularly with U.S. support, enabled Israel to recover all living detainees and most of those killed. Meanwhile, both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of violating the Gaza truce, with Gaza's health ministry reporting at least 242 Palestinians killed since the ceasefire began on October 10th. One month since the ceasefire, Gaza remains a landscape of rubble and unresolved dread. As Kushner and Witkoff push Phase 2, Israel demands for detainees and refuses to release armed Hamas fighters. Peace or new violation?
One month since the ceasefire began, and Gaza still bleeds beneath the weight of broken promises. The truce, brokered by U.S. President Donald Trump, promised peace after 2 years of war, but with over 240 Palestinians since October 10th, many in Israeli airstrikes, the question isn't just whether the ceasefire holds, but who it serves. Kushner and Witkoff, Trump's dealmakers, are back on the world stage, pushing the second phase, disarmament, an international force, and a new governance model for Gaza. But Israel demands the return of 4 deceased detainees, including Harar Golden, whose remains were finally recovered last week, before any further progress. And now, bereaved families are warning Washington, do not trade captured Hamas forces in the Palestinian side of Rafah for peace. Reports suggest Kushner is quietly negotiating safe passage for those fighters, sparking fury and exposing a dangerous rift between humanitarian optics and hard security realities. This so-called Board of Peace remains undefined, the stabilization force unformed, and trust shattered, with 50 million tons of rubble burying homes, hospitals, and hope. Some call this reconstruction, others see displacement in disguise. When peace plans sound like real estate pitches, when blueprints precede justice, can we really rebuild, or are we just clearing space for a new geopolitical bargain? Peace cannot be built on eviction notices. Before resorts, there must be rights. Before deals, there must be dignity. This isn't diplomacy, it's destiny. Hanging by a thread, on the ground, uncompromised.
And for more on this, we're joined from Washington by Ambassador Patrick Theros, the former American diplomat, and from occupied Jerusalem, Ms. Retiba Netcha, a member of the Palestinian National Action Committee. Welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Ambassador, Jared Kushner's visit focuses on phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire. It comes after a recent surge in tensions. So how significant is the timing of this high-level U.S. engagement, and what specific outcomes do you believe they are prioritizing right now?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's quite simple that Jared Kushner and Witkoff on and on are there trying to preserve the ceasefire and trying to move to phase 2. They are essentially dealing with a prime minister whose political future will end with once we move into phase 2 and phase 3. He knows that, and he needs to find any rational excuse, and it has to be an excuse that he can sell to his own public as well, to continue fighting in Lebanon, and if possible, end the ceasefire in Gaza. Mm-hmm. He simply cannot afford for the Gaza war to end and for Trump's plan to begin to be implemented. This, of course, means that the only lever, the only means of pressure on Netanyahu remain President Trump. And I think it's virtually President Trump personally. He can send Witkoff, he can send Kushner. Kushner has a bit of baggage because if you'll remember, he negotiated the Abraham Accords, which were pretty much what Netanyahu wanted. So Kushner's approach to Netanyahu in the past was all carrots and very few sticks. Now, he has no more carrots to offer. Kushner may simply be the wrong negotiator for this. It will take, in my opinion, a direct statement or a direct telephone call, open or otherwise, from President Trump to Mr. Netanyahu to get him to take steps that will allow the ceasefire to stay in place and we can move to the next phase. The next phase includes, most importantly, the deployment of an international force. Under current circumstances, I cannot see any Arab government that would be willing to risk troops. Personally, this is a personal opinion, I believe that only a European/NATO force, including Turkey, would be the only force that could enforce the ceasefire and have protect both Hamas from Israel and Israel from Hamas.
Mr. Netcha, Netanyahu stated that Israel is determined to impose the ceasefire agreement in Gaza with an iron fist. Now, how does this aggressive posturing impact the Palestinian perception of the ceasefire's viability?
I can't understand what the meaning of ceasefire by iron fist. It seems like bombing all the Palestinian or more killing, and it doesn't look like any kind of ceasefire, but because it's by force and it's not by agreement. Usually, when we have ceasefire, it comes during an agreement, and everyone agree in his role and demand to this or have demands and maybe some steps to reach this ceasefire. But talking about a ceasefire by force or by more attack or forces, it doesn't look like a ceasefire for me. And when they say it's by iron fist, it means that they will put more siege on Gaza and more restrictions and more forces on Gazian to make this ceasefire. And maybe it seems like a permanent occupation for Gaza, or putting more forces, military forces, in the Gaza Strip. Without these wars, I can't understand what the meaning of this kind of ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which not including any kind of peace or stability anymore. It seems like continuing the killing of the people in other ways under the name of the ceasefire. Actually, we can't reach this kind of ceasefire, and if the United States really demanding this ceasefire and putting offers by this high level of visiting to Israel from the United States government, I think that they must find new ways of a definition of this kind of ceasefire, and maybe new methods and way to work with the Israel and the Israel head minister to use other words for this kind of ceasefire and other ways, not the force and not the iron fist as he named it, Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that we must put a progress on earth, on ground, sorry, work toward this ceasefire in a way that can find a sustainable way in the Gaza Strip, and to be a permanent, not a permanent situation and a new occupation in the Gaza Strip, but to find ways for giving the Palestinians their rights and to remove all kind of the Israeli violation on the Gazan and the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Tharos, now I want to touch upon a point that you made earlier regarding Kushner's role, or maybe his inability to push for phase two in the current stage. Now, given Kushner's previous role in working out the Abraham Accords and his obvious relationship with President Trump, what unique leverage then or dynamic does his involvement bring to the current diplomatic efforts, particularly concerning the stability of the deal? Do you feel Trump will try and push or reinforce or strengthen his involvement in the situation rather than opting to pick up the phone and make a direct contact to Netanyahu?
I think he will try to have Kushner do it. Trump is at the moment a one-man government. Virtually everything important that is happening in Washington is directed personally by President Trump, which means you only have a certain amount of time in the day, and both your time and your stamina run out. At a recent meeting, he was seen falling asleep. I don't doubt it. I find it incredible that a man of his age could keep up this sort of pace. This means he needs somebody to run this for him. I am afraid that Mr. Kushner, with his obvious talents in the real estate development business, but a business approach to diplomacy is simply incompatible. In business, when you're dealing between two CEOs, one speaks to the other, they agree. There is no concern for what the employees might feel for what the CEOs are working out on. In diplomacy, you have heads of state who have to turn around and then explain to their populations why did they do it. And I don't think I don't think anything less than the brute force of a telephone call from President Trump will accomplish even maintaining the current ceasefire and getting through to phase two. Uh, we are asking Prime Minister Netanyahu to commit political suicide. And, you know, maybe we can give him asylum in the United States from the Israeli courts or something. But he is being asked to commit political suicide. The only way he can avoid that is by keeping a war going. The bombardments in Lebanon are, in my view, clearly an attempt to provoke Hezbollah into a response, and then he can reignite that war. He is being very frustrated because both Hamas and Hezbollah are holding back from responding to his provocations, and it's going to take some very hard and painful pressure directly from President Trump. Otherwise, I don't see how it could happen.
Well, Ms. Necha, you've mentioned the Israeli continuous violation of the ceasefire agreements with repeated strikes and ground incursions across the Gaza Strip and southern Lebanon as well. How is Israel justifying these ongoing operations then while a ceasefire is still in place? Do you agree with His Excellency the Ambassador that they are trying to provoke some sort of reaction that would allow Netanyahu to still keep Israel engaged in a military confrontation on both sides?
Look, first of all, I will talk about the Palestinian part of this ceasefire, because I'm not able to talk instead of the Lebanese people. But in the Palestinian case, we have a lot of steps that the United States must be really forcing in putting these things or these points in the Israeli on the Israeli tables, like involving the Palestinian government or involving the Palestinians in the situation in Gaza, the permanent situation in Gaza for real, and make efforts to put a framework for the staple forces in Gaza, which I don't know if it's really want to make a stable situation in Gaza or not, but we need to involve the Palestinian security system or the police in this kind of forces, and to put it in a or to legitimize these process by a UN resolution that put these actions in a framework that it's not against the UN resolution that we have as Palestinian. Without these, all the efforts that the United States is taking, it's not acceptable nor for the Palestinian and neither for the Israeli part, because the Israeli want by force to put a new de facto in Gaza Strip by taking more and more land and make military control on Gaza Strip, and by following the Israeli construction that it's implemented for every paper that or that the American proposed on this process, we will not achieve anything. The United States must play the role of a great country that have a role and a real well to put this well in action, and not following the Israeli well and trying to spoil Israel instead of achieving any kind of stability in the Middle East, including in the Gaza Strip. I think that it's not the Palestinian demand. I think that most of the countries, including the European countries and the Arab countries, is not willing to be involved in such a kind of forces in Gaza Strip without this framework. And most of them are insisting or demanding to have a role for the involvement, for a real role for the Palestinian PLO and the Palestinian people in this kind of governmental in government in the Gaza Strip and the stateful forces in the Gaza Strip as well. Without these steps, we will be far away from the will of the Palestinian people and far away from the Israeli will as well, ignoring the international resolution and legacy and ignoring any kind of achievements that we achieve as Palestinian and as the international will toward the Palestinian rights. So running after the Israeli demands is not the way of forcing Israel for a ceasefire, a real ceasefire in Gaza Strip, nor in North in South Lebanon as well. So the real way is to put the international will and the international, I think, justice in front of any kind of proposal that the United States is trying to implement in the Gaza Strip. By this, they can achieve a real ceasefire, not a ceasefire which is built on the force and power and enforcing more violation for the Palestinian rights in the Gaza Strip and more violation for the ceasefire itself. And we can achieve the second and third phase repeatedly and not sticking on the first phase continuously. And it seems that this first stage will not end it for any second or third stage by this way of Israeli behavior and Americans spoiling Israel on the account of the Palestinian rights till now.
Mm-hmm. Your Excellency, I want to take you to Netanyahu's recent speech at the Knesset. It suggested a high bar for security guarantees. From a political point of view, how does Israel's commitment to enforce the truce with an iron fist align with the U.S. goal of stabilizing the ceasefire agreement? Do you agree with Ms. Netcher that maybe Israel doesn't want the first phase to end?
I think I would go a bit further than that. I think Mr. Netanyahu would like to find a way to bring the whole process to a halt and restart the war. The first phase is damaging enough to Netanyahu. He still has he has an armed Hamas. The first phase cannot be accomplished until there is a stable, absent trust on both sides, and there is no trust at the moment. Even the first stage is not being implemented properly. So, absent, again, I sound like a broken record, I'm afraid, but absent the direct intervention of President Trump, I think Netanyahu is slowly going to achieve his goal of undermining even the first phase of the ceasefire.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ms. Snatcher, looking ahead, assuming everything does go according to plan, if phase 2 is successfully implemented, what foundational elements must be addressed immediately to ensure the cessation of hostilities eventually evolves into a more sustainable long-term political framework?
First of all, I think that the Egyptian rebuilding of Gaza plan continue a lot of details that can put like a guarantee and a pace for stable situation in Gaza on the humanitarian pace and on the political pace as well. But still, we need to find a way of involving or real involvement for the Palestinian in this next day of the war in Gaza Strip. Without that, we can't achieve anything. Neither a real humanitarian aids and nor a political stable situation in the Gaza Strip. I think that the international organization will play a role, and we need to enter a lot of international teams inside Gaza, and it can build a pace, a strong pace for a ceasefire in Gaza, because by involving this international organization and on international maybe implementation for humanitarian aids in Gaza and rebuilding Gaza, we can make a kind of security and protection for the people in Gaza Strip against the Israeli violation. And many countries will be involved in securing and saving this kind of ceasefire. So I think that we need this kind of international affairs in Gaza Strip, including international forces as well as international organization for the humanitarian aid, but without excluding the Palestinian role in this stage and having a Palestinian involvement and participation in every step in the Gaza Strip. Because without that, we will continue having that kind of a violation, and it will be like a permanent occupation in the Gaza Strip under the name of international forces, and we will replace the Israeli occupation with international occupation or maybe a United States occupation in the Gaza Strip. We are not looking for, as Palestinian, for a new kind of occupation ruled by the United States as a greatest state in the international community and leading a kind or a group of Western countries and Arab countries to do the role instead of the United States in Gaza Strip, in occupying the Gaza Strip. As Palestinian people, we believe that any kind of permanent solution and stable solution in Gaza Strip is to have Gaza as a part of the Palestinian state and establishing the Palestinian state with a free will of the Palestinians themselves.
Mr. Ambassador, the U.S. is working to stabilize the truce, be it through Kushner or maybe a phone call, as you are anticipating, between Trump and Netanyahu, a direct one. Now, are there certain mechanisms or guarantees that must be implemented, or must the U.S. offer to both parties to ensure the sustainability of the ceasefire beyond simply mediating its initial implementation and to avoid going back to square one?
I think there are two steps that must be taken. The first one being that President Trump must make it very clear to Mr. Netanyahu that the game is over, that there will be peace in Gaza and that the United States stands behind it. And then as a mechanism, though this is sort of advancing phase two before we get to the end of phase one, the deployment of stabilization, of a military stabilization force, not just peacekeepers, but people who are prepared to occasionally shoot somebody if necessary, the deployment of a force that I think can only come from Europe and NATO. You can't have American troops there because this is politically unpalatable in the United States. But frankly, if I were Hamas or anyone else, the only people I would surrender my arms to would be a friendly NATO government. And the only friendly NATO government that Hamas has at the moment is Turkey. So Turkey must be involved in such an international force. And then you also involve other Europeans, but you need to involve people, you need to involve countries from whose forces Netanyahu cannot attack, whose forces Netanyahu cannot push through. But he has to understand it's over. The game, if he doesn't understand that, or if Mr. Trump falters or gets distracted, the game will be over. This is Netanyahu is putting his considerable energy and the fact that he has a majority in his government that does not want an end to the killing. They don't want an end to the war. Means that if left alone, he will bring an end to the ceasefire.
Ambassador Patrick Darrows, the former American diplomat, and from occupied Jerusalem, Ms. Ratiba Necha, member of the Palestinian National Action Committee. Thank you both for being with us and joining us here on Think Tank. Well, we will still wait and see and follow all the latest developments, be it in Gaza or southern Lebanon. Hopefully phase 2 would be a very near future and a realistic option to talk about over the next episode. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.